So we have two photographers here who photographed George O'Keeffe. Toni Vacarro is an American photographer, particularly known for the images that he took during World War II and the reconstruction of Europe. For 8 months after D-Day, he served as a private with the 83rd Infantry Division in Europe, and by the end of the war, he had taken over 6,000 photographs. He remained in Europe for 4 more years, working for the Army newspaper Stars and Stripes and documenting the post-war reconstruction. Following his return to the United States in 1949, he had a successful career as a fashion and lifestyle magazine photographer, primarily for Life and Look, working most often as a freelancer. Vaccarro retired in 1982 to Long Island City, New York, where he oversees his studio and archive, holding over 600,000 of his images. Tonight, we'll be looking at the photographs Toni took of George O'Keeffe in 1960 at Abiquiu Ghost Ranch in Taos, New Mexico. Our other speaker is Christopher Makos, who was born in Lowell, Massachusetts. During the 1970s and 1980s, Makos photographed many artists and musicians in downtown New York, including Lou Reed, Debbie Harry, Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Andy Warhol. Makos' works have been exhibited at the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, the Tate Modern in London, the National Gallery in Washington, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Whitney Museum of American Art, and Brooklyn Museum in New York. His work is in the permanent collections of the IVAM in Valencia, the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid, and the National Portrait Gallery in Washington. Please join me in welcoming Toni Vacarro and Christopher Makos.
In 2 years, I will reach 100. When I was in high school in New Rochelle, New York, I ran the mile at a certain speed. I am going to run the mile when I am 100.
You want me to hold it? You want to sit? So we have some images that we wanted to start off with today, taken by the two photographers of George O'Keeffe, just to give you some context for what we're going to talk about tonight. I hope that you've all seen the show. Have you all seen the show? Great. So you'll see some things that are in the show here, but some things that are not. So we're kind of expanding the story tonight, which is great. So let me just kind of run through the slides, and then we'll start the discussion. So we're starting with Toni's photographs of George O'Keeffe that he took in 1960. And then we move to Christopher Makos' photographs of George O'Keeffe that he took in 1983. Her actual portrait of her, is that correct?
Yeah, there's an interesting story about this, because if you look at these pictures, by the way, I'm Christopher Makos, if you didn't know, and of course that's amazing Toni. I mean, wait till you hear the stories. He's got amazing stories, and he'll tell them for us. But this portrait, we went up to Warhol's factory, of which I was part of the Warhol factory. There were 4 factories. The first 2 factories, and then the remaining 2, one at 860 Broadway, and then the other one at 33rd Street on Madison Avenue. And so this particular time, Andy was a trader. He loved to trade other artists with other artists. All artists do that nowadays. So Andy wanted to trade George O'Keeffe one of his portraits for one of her paintings. So during this process, it came up about, let's go meet Georgia and hang out with her for a minute. So we went uptown, and I think this must have been in her hotel room. because unlike Toni, who seems to have a perfect memory of all of his stories, I don't remember my stories that much. So, so I don't know where this was taken. I know it was uptown, probably in a hotel room. But the interesting part is, this is the end of the portrait of the meeting of George O'Keeffe. The bigger story is here is what you're not seeing. I didn't. The show before this show was in Brooklyn, New York, at the Brooklyn Museum, and we showed 2 contact sheets with the original cropping marking on the sheets, so you could see the process of how I got to this picture. But somewhere between France and Germany last week or last month, and 3 days ago when they asked me, could you get these pictures for us? My archivist said I can't find the contact sheets. So because they were given back to us from the Brooklyn Museum. So unfortunately, you don't get to see the process, but the ultimate ending of that process is here. And if you will please go to one of the pictures with her and Juan Hamilton. So this was her boyfriend. Would we say it's her boyfriend?
Sure.
So this is her boyfriend. And I know I respected Juan Hamilton. He was a potter. He was her boyfriend. But I came for a portrait of her. So I placed them pretty much apart. See, can you see the story emerging here? So there was plenty of room for me as the photographer to crop. So, Juan was a potter unto his own. He was a very kind man, but I came there for another subject matter. And so you get to really see that in my contact sheet. But the pictures that we do have here, I'm not really sure. Do you think he knew what I was doing? He has this kind of funny expression. Like, are you taking a picture of just her? I kind of held the camera like a little bit off. Do you know what I mean? But so that's what you see here. And all of these pictures you hear are is the dialogue between Andy and Georgia and between Juan Hamilton and Georgia. When I photographed her, I was 35 years old, which is 35 years ago. Is that right? It was 35 years ago. 36 years ago. And she was 96. So it was very interesting because being a young man at that age of 35, I'd never photographed anybody that old. Although I photographed people like Elizabeth Taylor, and people like that were really unique and special. Malcolm Forbes asked me on a fun trip. He used to have these big parties in Marrakesh. At his chateau in Normandy, France. It was called Chateau Balleroy, and he would invite all of us over. And some of us he'd put on the Concorde, and some of us on his private plane. And we'd get there, and one year he had this thing. It was like Walter Cronkite, Elizabeth Taylor, and I came up with this idea. Let's do portraits of all these people, and the idea was to do one sofa. It was at the same sofa, 5 different people. I know I'm digressing from the George O'Keeffe,
That's okay.
but as I pointed out, I can extend a story just the way Hamburger Helper extends a nice meatloaf. So, when it came to Elizabeth Taylor, who had been a movie star all of her adult life, I was like, what's this going to be like? So I kept waiting and waiting, and she just wouldn't show up. I said, and then I realized she has been married to very powerful, strong men in her life. Does anybody know who she was married to? Refresh my memory. Who was she married to? Richard Burton, a strong man, and Mike Todd, who died in the plane crash. Right, these were strong men. Once I remembered that, I said, "Get the hell out here." Okay, and then she showed up, and once she was out there, she was just mush in my hands. She needed a strong director, and that's what we do as photographers. We sort of see who our subject matter is and then size them up. And so I wish I had that picture to illustrate. I don't, If you go Google it on your phones, when you leave here, you can probably find it. Elizabeth Taylor, Chris Makos.
But so that leads me to a question that I have, which is when you all were photographing Georgia O'Keeffe, how much did she have to do with the way she was photographed versus the way you were photographing her? How much was her hand in those images of her, or was it you choosing how to photograph her?
I originally
Oh, yeah.
was ordered by the editor of Look magazine
We go back to some of
to go to Santa Fe and do a story on George O'Keeffe. When I arrived there, one of the reasons that I posed this picture the way it is because Life magazine told me to leave space on the right to write the story of how I met her here. But when the time came, the story didn't appear. But the reason it's like that is because the story should have been written here. Instead, it was written apart from the picture. The shadow that you see there is from her studio. We began to work. I was given the assignment to do a story on her from Life magazine. Actually, at that time, 4 magazines were involved. Life, Look, Flair. I forgot the 4th.
Newsweek.
But the story was supposed to be written here, but eventually they liked the picture as it is. Otherwise, I would have framed it better. Georgia was a little upset with me because I had met her grandfather. His name was Giorgio Otto. In Italian, Otto means 8. So I suddenly arrived with a knowledge about her family that she didn't think that anyone would know. But Giorgio Otto was her grandfather. And I met him, shook his hands. And then I went back to Life magazine because all the magazine wanted a story on her. The story, this particular story, this picture appeared in Look, in Life, in Newsweek, and some other magazine. When something like this happens to a photographer, it's a fortune. And one of the reasons is that any magazine that uses your work has to pay you. So I almost became rich because of this picture.
Good for you.
Anyway, I liked her, and her grandfather, his name was Giorgio Otto, which means George the Eighth. Otto in Italian means 8. And but she hated Italians for some reason. She wanted nothing to do with an Italian boy, so I said, I am not Italian. I was born in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Oh, good. And that's when we became friends. And friends enough that she took this big painting. See, the shadow that you see there was her studio, and she just pulled it here, and I took this picture. The reason I took this picture, because Life magazine was going to run the story here.
That's right, you said
over
that. Yeah.
this picture, but eventually life went out of business, and I'm left with a picture without whatever life wanted to say about her.
So did you, one thing that I noticed in the show is that your photographs of Georgia O'Keeffe, she seems very relaxed, and she's often smiling or laughing, and that is not typical of photographs of her. So for instance, if we look back,
She,
there's a kind of a humor and a comfort there. So it seems like you all must have really gotten
she
along.
liked me. When I took this picture, as you can see, I was in the driving car. I drove her, and I put in. I had a bottle of wine, and I filled her glass. You know, now I met her grandfather. His name was
That's right,
Giorgio Otto.
Yeah, that's right. You said that.
And she had no idea that I had met him. I went through the trouble of meeting him. It wasn't easy. But that's the kind of photographer I was. I wanted the roots of what was happening.
And didn't you tell me that, he told me this earlier, that this was because you were going to have a picnic? This photograph came from you and Georgia were going to have a picnic, but you couldn't have a picnic because?
We had organized a picnic there where Indians lived. As a matter of fact, one of the Indians that I met appears in one of the coins of America, you know. And I was involved with this Indian that I think appeared in the 5 cents US dollar.
Yeah.
Or nickel?
Yeah.
Yes, nickel. Yes, it's an Indian. That was after my picture of this Indian head. So, and this was the other picture. We were supposed to have a picnic outside on the sand, but it was raining. So I had a bottle of red wine in my front seat. I filled that up. I gave her a piece of Swiss cheese. And as I was doing these things, I turned around and I saw doing this. And as you can see, I have the camera always ready to shoot. I am ready to shoot you people. I know exactly how it's going to be, you know, to get some results. And as she did this, I bang, shot this picture.
It's great. Yeah.
And after it appeared in Look, I think, Look magazine, she was grateful. She called me up and says, "Thank you. It's a great picture." She was very grateful in dealing with me. So she's happy. And I'm delighted. It's one of my key point of my life.
That's great.
To have met her. I have met the greatest people that lived in this century, and I'm delighted for it.
That's great.
I did go to the South Pole. I saw the Earth there. I am in a helicopter far away, and there is the Earth. It's amazing to see these things. But it was my job. I was a photographer. My work appeared in many newspapers, many magazines. And I still take pictures because I've already shot you without them knowing. It's right here.
And Christopher, when you were taking these photographs, let's see if I can go forward again.
I can't compete with his stories.
Yeah.
I mean, his stories are like, they had a relationship.
These
I
are
was there with Ann.
all the pictures I took.
Oh, just to give you a little hint. So I was doing these what are called piece portraits, and so when I was editing with my archivist Peter Wise in New York City like 2 days ago, he had sent the things, and he didn't see this. But I would often take pictures. Well, when I do portraits of people that come to me and want a commission portrait, it's like a full life portrait in the way that Italians love to have statuary in their homes. I make life-size portraits of people, and I take a picture of Toni's head, midsection, bottom, and then I piece the pictures together. So I didn't have this opportunity with Georgia because she was in New York in '83 for some exhibit she was having at a museum. So we were either in her hotel room. There must have been, that's the chair that, what's his name, must have sat in. But, so that's why when the pictures came in, I just immediately took them and started to piece these two together. So we weren't in the same kind of relationship that Toni had with her. I mean, my thing was much more hit and run. He was there and hung out with her. I went up with Andy. We took a taxi ride, and like I said, he was up there wheeling and dealing, wanting to get to do a portrait, to do her portrait, and then she would give him a painting. But from what I remember, I don't think Andy got a painting. I don't think he got a painting, and he did some silkscreen portraits of her.
Well, one of them is in the show, yeah.
The portrait is in the show?
Yeah.
But there are not many around. I think there's just like two, right?
Yeah.
I think there's just two of them because he didn't get his part of the deal, so he didn't do many. I think you're very lucky if you have it here because there's just two or three around.
The very end of the show, yeah.
So I was, like I said earlier, I was just trying to size up what was going on at the time because Andy was doing his thing, and I sort of get out of the way, Andy, you know what I mean? Because I want to take this picture, and then I got him out of the way, and I was trying to get Juan Hamilton out of the way, so that I finally got my portrait of her. So it was a very different process, but we both come to the same end, finding something that we're both comfortable with and that speaks to us and hopefully has the language to communicate with you, the viewer.
And when you were photographing her, by that time, so many photographers had photographed her over the years. Did that bother you, or is that something you were concerned with?
I don't really do things like that, look at other people's pictures, because it affects me. I'm kind of sensitive that way. And then I think maybe I can't live up to that or something.
Yeah.
So very much in the way that I did my first book, White Trash, in 1977, I would get right into it. I have a lot of energy, so let's go. Let's get going. And I sort of bare bones get into the subject matter and see what was going on.
Yeah.
So this was that same philosophy. I knew I didn't have much time because it was just a brief encounter. And so it was unlike Warhol, who from most of my career from 76 to 1976 to 86 when Andy died, the 10-year period, I was part of the factory. We were best friends. So my catalog of photography is heavily weighted on Warhol. So I know that they're having a Warhol exhibition here, I think, in the near future. And hopefully some of my pictures will be in them so that you can see my take of Andy during that time frame.
That's great, yeah. I have some questions that I wrote out, so let me just make sure that we cover most of them. Let's see here. I was curious to ask Toni about this particular one. Let me see if I can get back to it. There's this one that includes both you and her. So how did that come about?
This was an incredible evening. She invited all the children around her house to eat with her. And I am there. I have my camera on a tripod, going, and here I'm telling them, look at my camera, please, and smile. Have fun.
Yeah.
So the week before I took this picture, I was in Venice, and the shirt I am wearing is the shirt that the gondoliers in Venice
right.
take you around, you see. And so what I did, I asked one of the gondoliers if I could have one of the shoulders, one of the things. And what did he do? He took it up and says, this is for you.
That's great.
And I put it on quickly, and then this was a day when she entertained the children that lived around her, that they knew her, she knew them, and I am trying to tell them, please look at the camera and smile. You see, so some are smiling, some are not, but the shirt I am wearing is, if you go to Venice,
That's right, you
it's
said
the
that.
shirt
Yeah.
the gondoliers wear.
So how long did you spend with her? Because there are quite a few images that you took of her.
Oh, I was there maybe a month.
Okay. Yeah.
I was working for Life magazine. I was getting lots of money day by day, so
Right?
I had
Yeah.
no hurry.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's called a day rate. Photographers get contracts and they work on day rates. It could be $2,000-$3,000 a day.
Yes.
You know, and even
Yes.
more. I mean, it
Yes.
doesn't exist anymore today, but
Yes.
at that time it did. So it was,
Yes, I was making a fortune.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And what
great.
did I do with it? I ate it.
Great.
So did you, this one
This,
fascinates me because
we
of
went
her in the
for-
landscape.
That Bryce Canyon.
We went for a walk in the desert. And I came down and I saw this little thing there, looks like a smokestack. And she wanted to see the desert. I knew where to take her because I had been there. And as she came, I ran down, went in front, and took this picture as where this kind of smokestack ruin happens to be there, and it's still there, by the way. So
Toni,
we went walking in the desert
Yeah,
with her.
all of the pictures, was she aware that she needed to be fashionable in her pictures? Because look at this. I mean, she's all decked out, very fashionably dressed.
Yes.
I mean, she was aware of the camera.
It's one of the influences I think I had on her. I was a fashion photographer.
Okay. Okay, so did you help her dress for the pictures?
Yes, I told her to go there, go up, and then walk down. And when she arrived under this kind of smokestack,
Yeah.
that it's still there, by the way, I took this picture. Now, at first she was upset with me because I had photographed her grandfather.
Oh, that's right. You said that. Yeah.
No, that's
She because I went directly to him, she was upset that I didn't go through her.
Right.
everybody's
see,
like that. That's not
but,
new. You know,
Yeah.
people don't like that, it seems.
And how did you? There's so many photographs of her that are black and white. So I'm curious as to how you ended up doing these color ones of her.
Eventually, I was doing black. I love black and white.
Mhm.
Eventually, I went to color to show her in color.
Magazines demanded it, didn't they? Kind of. I mean,
Did they
And I
want
was
color for the
making
magazine?
Lots of money because Life paid me a lot of money.
Yeah.
Look paid me lots of money.
no, but I meant the
Flair,
magazines.
they all paid.
Yeah, but they wanted color at a certain point. They wanted color.
At a certain point, they wanted color.
Yeah.
Yes. The world newspapers at one time were just black and white, and gradually they introduced color. And this is this picture is famous because when you go into the restaurant in Long Island City, you enter on the left is this big picture, as big as that door in this restaurant. What is it called?
Yeah. What's the name of the restaurant?
You know. No. The name of the restaurant in Long Island City.
But I want to ask you a question, Tony, because at the time, the three women artists were Frida Kahlo, her, and Louise Bourgeois. Did you photograph any of these other women, like Frida Kahlo or Louise Bourgeois?
No, but there was another one. She was a ballerina. Really? Well,
You
see,
did
he knows
photograph
more
Louise
than
Bourgeois.
me.
Yeah. You remember being there?
Yes, yes. One of the greatest dancer at that time. She was the daughter of an Indian man, a king. Oh, her name, I have it here. It doesn't come now.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
But you see the order that I used to have. I decided to have half an inch of space on the left, and I had the shadow of the roof of her house on the left to show that I had just taken this picture out about 2-3 yards out of the house. And here she turned around and says, "Do you like it this way?" I said, "I love it." And I clicked this picture. In fact, I clicked 3-4 times. And
Shall we look?
I find it so amazing
now
that
it's a
Tony
classic.
has his descriptions of really thinking out the picture. In other words, finding the shadow of the studio space there, and all of these things. For me, it's like I have this whole catalog of Warhol work that I was talking about, or I have a portrait of Mick Jagger out in Montauk, and people will point out things to me that I think like, wow, and it only makes the picture more fascinating, especially when people come to me and they say, "Oh, did you know what he's doing?" An example is on a trip to Beijing, China. It was the first time Warhol had been to China. It was just when it was opening up, and so we went to the Forbidden City, and there's this big statue of a lion. And I said, "Andy, stand over by the lion." And he's making this face like this, And for years I thought, well, why is he making this face, And then recently, in recent history, somebody said, "Oh, because he's mimicking the lion." And I said, "Oh, great." So now I have that. I realize what the picture is about. In the same way that I've been looking at this picture of Mick Jagger for years and years, and it's a portrait of him when he was his band was touring with the Sticky Fingers album, and he used to rent Warhol's compound out in Montauk, Long Island. And so Mick was there, and I took a picture of him, and he was just wearing a T-shirt and everything, and a sweater. And the T-shirt was something about Linda Ronstadt, L.A., and he was wearing a sweater. Well, a very fashionable collector of mine said, "Oh, do you know that he's wearing a Missoni sweater?" Of which I know the Missoni family, and so we sent the picture to them. But it was another example. Unlike Toni, who seems to know way in advance what's going on in his pictures, I don't know if I'm lucky or what, but I get to see this new life in my photographs year after the picture have been taken.
I mean, one thing that strikes me about your photographs is that they seem very casual in a way. If we look at there's
That's
Yeah.
a casual picture. But I take a casual picture and I can crop it into a formal picture, which is what you saw in the other thing. In other words, sometimes when you do a studio portrait, it's so specifically a studio. There's a scrim. There's just the subject matter, lights, and a white backdrop or a gray backdrop. And in my case, not that I'm a street photographer, but I know how to take my studio and put it inside of my camera, and so I can make a studio anywhere. And it depends on how far I want to go with the studio look. So yes, they're casual settings, but often, even when you're in a formal setting, as a photographer, you have to be sort of a psychotherapist. You sort of size up the people, they size you up, and you have to make them comfortable, whether it's on a street setting or in a studio. And once you are comfortable with the subject matter, then they start to show themselves of who they really are. And that's when you get a real picture. Often it's the picture in between the picture where you get the subject matter.
Yeah, I guess I meant like the relationship, say, between these two here and this one.
Well, that brought about the formal portrait at
Yeah.
the end because she was
your
very
process.
relaxed by the time, and Andy was, chit-chatting with her. Andy owned 7 or 8 different wigs, and he would have different wigs for different occasions, and he actually would go get the wig. He'd go to a barber shop and have him get haircuts because he just wanted to feel normal, and that's why he had lots of wigs. So he'd buy longer wigs and then go to barber shops and get haircuts.
I think that is a great note to end our program tonight. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.